السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. Good evening and welcome back as we continue our Monday night sessions of Thrive. This week, inshallah, we continue our discussion of the fruit that we've been speaking about for the past 2 weeks. This series of Thrive, we've called it the fruits of faith. And the idea is that as one attempts to grow spiritually, attempts to grow closer to Allah, they ought to see the fruits of their efforts. The faith, the iman that they seek to develop in their life, it should bear fruits. Allah describes iman in the Quran as a tree. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ. He describes iman as a tree, and a tree should have fruits. And so in this series, we hope to speak about the fruits of faith. In the previous series, we spoke about spiritual impediments, things that obstruct our growth spiritually as we attempt to grow closer to Allah. This is a little bit different. Here, by growing spiritually and growing closer to Allah, we ought to see a change in our lived experience. Spiritually speaking, we ought to see ourselves handle situations differently. I was talking to somebody and they were telling me how they went through something really difficult in life. And prior to that, I remember them as someone who would struggle quite often with different things in life. You know, life was tough for them and they would have these difficulties. And subhanAllah, they got to a point where they began to make a lot of effort spiritually to grow. And when that really, disastrous and terrible thing happened in their life, I was very worried because I was like, man, I've seen this person struggle with far less than this. This is something quite serious. And subhanAllah, they came out really, really strong. And I remember talking to them and saying, like, how'd you get through this? And they said that, subhanAllah, I've been making this effort to grow closer to Allah, to really ground myself in trusting Him, in really recognizing that the world is a place of tribulation and test. Like making an effort to really internalize those understandings. And they said it's really refreshing that having gone through this difficulty, I'm seeing the fruits of all the effort I had put into growing spiritually. The goal for them was to be able to handle the challenges, the vicissitudes of life. And they said, subhanAllah, I was able to do so. And it's almost like, all my effort and my work was not in vain. Like I'm seeing the results of it. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here, is we're hoping to discuss certain fruits that we should be seeing in our lives a little bit. The more the better, but at the very least, as we grow spiritually, we ought to see these fruits manifest at some level. And the fruit that we've been speaking about until now has been love. This is the third session. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about this. Why? Because this is one of the most important fruits of faith. The idea that a human being opens themselves up to seeing beauty in the world around them and thus being able to appreciate Allah's creation and the Creator Himself. Beauty requires a certain, or rather love requires a certain degree of purity. What we've been speaking about in the previous weeks has been the idea that every human being at their core, they have what's called a nafs, a lower self. that has what we might describe as animalistic passions. Everybody has it. And this part of us pushes us towards really like sensory, surface, immediate pleasures. And so as a result of being driven by the nafs, we lust, or we become people of appetite. But as you grow spiritually, one of the main objectives of the spiritual path is to control and discipline and regulate the desires and the demands of the nafs, of the lower self. When you do that, you then free up your soul to seek out the deeper meanings and realities of life, amongst which is beauty, like true beauty. See, scholars as well as philosophers, they've long talked about a dichotomy of appearance versus reality, form versus reality, or form versus meaning. In the world is forms containing deeper meanings and realities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when He speaks about teaching the Prophet Adam, He says, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. He taught the Prophet Adam the names of everything. And the scholars, they talk a lot about what does that mean? Like, what was it that Allah taught the Prophet Adam? One thing we know is that He didn't merely teach him the names. The meanings of those names, the meanings that those names represented, were also understood by the Prophet Adam. A word, language is symbols. It's an example of form. Maulana Rumi, for example, he says, you know the word flower? The word flower doesn't smell good. And it doesn't look beautiful. Do you get that? Like it's just a word. What actually smells good? The reality that that word represents, the actual flower, the haqiqah. Do you get that? And that's a lot of the world around us. One poet, he said, إِنَّمَا الْكَوْنُ مَعَانٍ قَائِمَةٌ بِالصُّوَرِ مَنْ يُدْرِكُ هَذَا كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعِبَرِ. He says, the person who realizes that the world around them is forms, outer, exterior forms and appearances that contain within them meaning. When they realize that, they'll begin to seek the meaning through reflection. كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعِبَرِ. You won't just look at something and walk away. You'll look and you'll look through it to the deeper meaning of it. That's what's called perspective. To see through something that's an apparent form. And we've talked a little bit about this, but this is a very important idea. The idea that in life, we don't become people who live life on the surface. We're satisfied with external appearances, outer forms. And I'm not just talking about physical objects. I'm not just talking about physical objects that you settle for the external form of something. Young children do that. Young children do that. A young child, if you offer them a candy and $1 million check, they go for the candy, usually. Why is it? Because they don't think about the meaning and what the check represents. They think about the immediate gratification they'll get from the candy. For a lot of us, that's what we are. Despite having grown up, we settle for these immediate pleasures, these forms that will give you a temporary buzz, but other things in life, which are far more meaningful, far more fulfilling, because they don't appear that way, we opt for the former. So there are so many instances in our lives that only when we're forced to do we realize a deeper meaning and value of something. And I'll give you an example. How many of you have experienced a moment where you were reading maybe a book or listening to a podcast or having a conversation with someone, and the content was so deeply satisfying and edifying that it was really hard to kind of put it into words what it meant to you. How many of you have experienced something like that? And like no amount of food could ever give you that. There is no cheesecake so good that would ever give you that feeling there. Aristotle, he talks about intellectual pleasures versus sensory pleasures, and how sensory pleasures are things that even animals enjoy, whereas the human being has the ability to appreciate deeper truths and realities. You know, for some of us, we really just enjoy understanding something. You know, when it just makes sense, you're just like, wow. And it just puts you in a state of enjoyment. And it's hard to explain because it's not a sensory enjoyment. And the worst is when you turn to somebody beside you and you try to get them to appreciate it. You're like, yo, did you hear about this? And they're looking at you like, dude, just let me play my PS5. Like, leave me alone. Why are you telling me about this random theory that just, it blows your mind? It blows your mind, right? We talk about becoming people of substance. It's an expression we use. Why? What do we mean by that? Y'all have heard that expression? People of substance? What do we mean? Are we not all substance at some level? Don't we all have flesh, bones? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about becoming a person of substance. What is that? Substance is what occupies a form. This is understood. That we want to move beyond the form. We're seeking something deeper. But maybe we've settled for the shallow. Maulana Rumi, he says, he gives an example. And that's the profundity of his poetry. It's the ability to bring out these deeper realities of life. He talks about how people might, and he gives it's an analogy, right? People search for the moon. Their mistake is, at nighttime, while they're looking, they come across a pond or a river. And what do they see? They see the moon. And they're like, this is amazing. And they're blown away. But what's their mistake? That's not the moon. That's just a reflection. That's just a form. For the moon, you have to actually look up. And then you'll see the actual moon. For many of us, we're settling for these shallow pleasures of life. Think about it. That's what a lot of us, we do. And that's what's sold to us. We've become a society of appetite. That's why nobody sells things through facts anymore. Nobody sells you anything through facts. They sell it to you in a way that would appeal to how it'll make you look, or how you will feel, or the image you will hold if you have this product, or how this will make you distinguished from others. It appeals to your nafs. No one tries to tell you that this will add a deep layer of meaning. No one's selling shoes like that. Because that's what we've become. A society, subhanAllah, that we've become people of form, and we no longer value the meanings and the realities behind those forms. And so our goal, especially through this class, is to grow spiritually such that we don't just talk about the forms of spirituality, but we actually embody them. It's one thing to talk about love. It's another thing to walk through life looking through the lens of love at everything that you see. And the two are very different. How many of you have maybe an elderly grandparent who's a very loving person? How many of you have someone like that? And maybe it's just like a relative or a family friend. And it's so obvious that the moment you meet them, there's a warmth. It's not a theory. They don't talk to you about love. They just exhibit it. That when you meet them, they're so warm, they're so gentle, they're so positive. They see the good in you. Like you have other people who, when they meet you, they're like, oh, you put on weight, right? Like that's what they notice, your form. That's what they notice, your form. Meanwhile, this person looks at you and goes, MashaAllah, how have you been? I missed you. And they're talking about you and not your form. And oh, last time we had a great conversation. You were telling me about something important to you. Tell me more about it. And you're like, SubhanAllah, this person really, really values me. That's love. That's embodied love. That's not theory. So even religion can take on forms. That's why on the Day of Judgment it's mentioned, actions will not just be counted. Allah says in the Quran, وَنَضَعُ الْمَوَازِينَ الْقِسْطِ. We will put the scales of justice. Scales where you weigh. Actions will be weighed, not just counted. Where does the weight, the substance of an action lie? Where does it lie? Anyone? Yeah. Intention is beautiful. The inner spirit, starting with the intention. The inner spirit of the action. Look, all of us pray 2 rak'ahs of Fajr, correct? And Abu Bakr prayed 2 rak'ahs of Fajr. There's a world of difference between his 2 rak'ahs and our 2 rak'ahs. It's not a number. And we're not allowed to change the number. We can't be like, you know what, I want to be more pious than Abu Bakr. I'm going to do like 15. You can't do that. You have to pray 2, just like he prayed 2. But there was something about the state of his heart as he stood in prayer. It's mentioned in the Shama'il about the Prophet ﷺ, when he would stand in prayer, he would weep so profusely, it was as though there was the sound of a boiling pot coming from his chest. You know when someone is just profusely crying? That's a spirit. That's very different than what? A theory. And so our goal has to be to become people who embody these characteristics, these fruits that we seek. We don't just want to know the names of them, but we want to actually experience them. I want to have moments in my life where I deeply feel hopeful for God's mercy. I don't just know about God's mercy, but in my heart I feel something that makes me feel really hopeful. And I have moments where I actually am worried about my relationship with God. Moments where I feel a deep love for God. I just want to talk. I don't just want to talk about it. I don't just want to have the words. Yeah, I believe I love God. I mean, those are words. Is there a reality that aligns with that in my heart? Now, societies of the past, they valued these truths and realities. They really did. We've become a little bit different now. Just think about our society. By and large, the emphasis is upon quantification. Quantification or language, but language devoid of meaning. Now, you might ask somebody, how many languages do you know? And you're not talking about Spanish and Italian and Persian and Arabic. You're talking about Java, right? Python. And you're talking about code. What does code mean? Nothing. It's just a functional language that brings about certain functions. And we dedicate our lives to it. Again, I'm not here to get on anybody's case because everyone's like, yo, that's not, I didn't know this was where this conversation was going. No, that's not what I mean. I mean to say that is what is glorified in our society now. We don't read books. The emphasis is not there. Why are you wasting your time? The idea that I would read poetry. Why would you read poetry today? In the world that we live in, no one really seems to see a value for it. Earlier societies didn't just read poetry, they wrote poetry. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Arabs were people of poetry. And you might say, well, okay, big deal. right? Like we got ChatGPT, and you can pull out some pretty good poetry too. No, but there's difference. There's a difference. Imagine I wrote a poem for you, and imagine I printed out, or not printed out, but like I requested ChatGPT to write one for you, and I sent it to you, and I told you that, hey, I got this from ChatGPT. Which one means more to you? And let's say mine was like semi-decent. Let's just say it was semi-decent. Hopefully mine. If you say ChatGPT, I'm out, guys. I'm like, really? Have we gotten to that point already? No, we appreciate, we say it's the thought that counts. Is it not? We say it's the thought that counts. That you sat down and you dug deep into how you feel about this person and you wrote something. Poetry, the word for poetry in Arabic is shi'r. The poet is called a sha'ir. This word in Arabic comes from the root letters shin, ayn, ra, where you also get another word, sha'ara yash'uru shu'uran, which means to feel. Because poets feel deeply. The time of the Prophet ﷺ, people were poets, they were people who felt deeply. They were people driven by passion. And passion is at some level stigmatized in our society. If someone's very passionate, we're like, ooh, right? If someone says, yo, cool, calm, and collected, we're like, oh, that's good. But the idea that somebody's passionate, we frown upon it, almost like it's a weakness. Every one of us has passion. Every one of us. We're human, so we have passion. For many of us, the issue is that we have unrefined passion. We haven't refined our passions to really feel deeply about more meaningful things. I mean, think about humor. Think about humor. What do we as a society find funny? Sometimes it's the most crude of jokes. No? Those are the types of things that appeal to our sense of humor. Now, as somebody matures, as people mature, they start to appreciate things that are a little bit different. Often things that are a little bit more intelligent, a little more clever. That's what dad jokes are, guys. I know. Once you become a dad, it's just, the software update just comes overnight. You know what I mean? It comes with the kid. And you can't help but make dad jokes. I started making them too, you know that? It's wild. I have to hold myself now, right, Naira? I'm like, guys, can I make this joke? It just came to mind. I didn't mean it. But usually it's a play on words, right? You might call it a very poor play on words or something, but it's a play on words. It's a joke about the nature of something. It's a pun. But like, you know what, little children, what do they find humorous? Think about it, like a little 2-year-old. You stand in front of them, you go, douche, and you fall down. And what do? They just crack, or they just burst out laughing. Ha, 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 ha. And you stand back up, and you do it again, and they just laugh again. And you could do it like 10 times, and they'll laugh every time. Isn't it interesting? That's what little kids do. They laugh at the most seemingly meaningless things. But subhanAllah, as we get older, at some level, we also start to lean into these types of things. We like, pranks. And people find it really funny. And they're grown adults. But they almost take pleasure in seeing somebody suffer. I'm not here to just judge anybody or attack anybody, even though you're like, that's exactly what you're doing. No, what I'm trying to say is, our society, subhanAllah, when it comes to the passions, and it's because we've lost a concept of the soul. We don't really believe in a soul, and the idea that I should aim for the refinement of my soul, the idea that I have appetites that don't serve me well, that I actually have to make an effort to control. We don't have that concept anymore. And as a result, it's hard to really appreciate those deeper truths, develop that beauty of the soul that people of the past used to really emphasize. It's rare now it's rare now to find people who are comfortable expressing their passion. I'm a big believer in the need for passion. Of course, it has to be refined, and it has to be controlled, and it has to be guided by reason, absolutely. But we cannot stamp out passion. Because when you do that, you stamp out love. And then people don't love, they're just kind of like, cool, yeah, I love you too. It's like, that's not how people use. That's why love, there's so much poetry about it. Because if you feel deeply, it will bring to heart and mind poetry. The poets at the time of the Prophet ﷺ were freestylers. Like, they didn't sit down and write up a poem. They would meet somebody, that person would say something, and they would just say a poem right there. And we struggle with poem now. We struggle with language. Whereas language is our ability to make sense of the world if we get the meanings behind them. See, now we talk a lot about developing the world. How often do we talk about developing the human? Developing the human. We don't even know what that means now. Develop a human? Like, what are you, building a human being? Like, no. SubhanAllah, how many of us will graduate from university and we will have a particular skill set that can be used to develop the world? But can you understand your emotions and your thoughts? Some of us will say, heck no. I've never even sat down a day to ever try to make sense of like my thoughts. No idea. Give me like some type of work to do, some accounting, I could do it. But ask me to sit down with myself and control some of my desires and control some of my behaviors. I don't know how to do it, man. I can't help myself. Really? Like you are educated, you've taken all the ethics classes, but you cannot hold yourself back from doing something so obviously unethical and immoral? That you will then have countless people come out and say, yeah, this individual, they abused me. What's missing? It's not like they didn't have an education, but the whole education system was focused on development of the world. Let's build a world. Of what use is a beautiful world if you have savages walking around? All they will do is tear it down. Right? Take a bear and put it in a beautiful art gallery. What will it do? It'll tear it down. But that's what a bear's kind of expected to do. How is it that we have humans? You put them in a country and they destroy it. They murder their own citizens. And I say a country, but we could talk about multiple countries. If we're not seeing the rot at the core of the human condition today, we don't have the right glasses on, guys. This is a serious issue. Religion and spirituality always came back to this idea. It's not about developing the world. A beautiful soul will develop a beautiful world, yes. A beautiful soul will develop a beautiful world. There used to be a saying, and it's attributed to the great companion Ali radiallahu an, where he said, وَتَحْسِبُ أَنَّكَ جِرْمٌ صَغِيرٌ وَفِيكَ انْطَوَى الْعَالَمُ الْأَكْبَرُ. That you consider yourself as a human being to be this really small, insignificant entity. Meanwhile, you contain a whole universe within you. And that's why some would refer to the human as the microcosm. That the human being has immense potential for good, but also immense potential for evil. Which one do we, there's a saying about, a proverb about an elder that was teaching his child, that within each human being, there are two wolves, the wolf of good and the wolf of evil. And the kid asks which one wins, and he says, whichever one you feed. We are day and night feeding the wolf of evil. Which TV show now speaks about good and beauty as opposed to immorality? Which books now? Which books? I mean, for children, as a parent, buying books for my child, it's so hard. They'll like contain a good moral lesson. Now much of our media, including books and movies and stuff, they're very simple in their understanding of the human condition. It really contributes to the polarizing nature of our society. They paint people as either good or bad. So quickly you identify who the protagonist is and who the villain is, quickly. And you take sides and you're done. One thing about beautiful literature is they present people on both sides with good and bad. And then you're torn. You're like who's good? They're kind of good too, but they're kind of good too. And they've got some flaws. And this kind of evil over here. And you're torn. In one chapter, you're like, it seems like the author is trying to make these people the good guys. And then the next chapter, you're like, maybe it's these guys. Why is that so beautiful? Because that's actually what reflects the world around us. Even your enemy, the person that you don't like, the person that you have blocked on all social media accounts, even that person has some redeeming qualities. Even that person has some beauty to them. And as good as we think we are, we have flaws. That's the true nature of the world. But because we've lost an understanding of the human condition, we now just paint people good and bad, black and white, everything's like that. Polarization. And so, one person was saying how politicians now, that's all they speak about, changing the world. Because that's relatively simple, changing the world around you. What about changing the world within you? Oh, politician, can you change the world within you? Because all the evil that comes from you comes from within you. From your biases, from your racism and your fascism. That's where that comes from. Could you correct that? And then maybe when you go in the world, you'll actually bring about some type of order to the chaos. So, yeah, we're like a society of melodrama, right? Just good and evil. No nuance to the human condition anymore. So poetry is really powerful. Allah revealed the Quran to the Arabs who were masters of poetry. That's not by accident. Because they were people who felt deeply, which is why the Quran would move them. When you feel deeply, you're moved easily. Think about that. When you feel deeply, you're moved easily. How often when you're sick, do you move to tears quickly? Why? Because when you're sick, you're feeling your pain. That's why for some of us who've numbed our hearts as we go through life, either in the name of self-preservation or in the name of masculinity or in the name of being logical, those of us who've numbed our hearts, we find it very hard to feel anything. We don't feel deeply connected to people. We'll listen to Quran and the person beside us is crying and we don't feel anything. And Allah in His mercy, then sometimes He breaks our heart. And you might say, how is that a mercy? Because a broken heart is an open heart. When it's closed and it's numb and you will not allow anybody in, you keep everybody at a distance, you don't think deeply about anything, you're just a very task-oriented person, get things done. I get things done. Okay, that's nice. But can you connect? Can you connect to your child? Can you connect to your spouse? Yeah, you could go through a marriage on the surface. You could do it. And both spouses will suffer. Because that's not what we seek. We don't seek to just coexist, parallel living. We seek to be connected. But to do that, you have to open yourself up to feel. And when you open yourself up to feel, you open yourself up to the risk of being hurt. But that is the risk that you should always be willing to play. Because the alternative is no complete existence. You're lacking that feeling, that love. The Prophet ﷺ used to make dua for love. Do you know that? Allahumma inni as'aluka hubbak. Oh Allah, I ask you to grant me your love. which would mean that the Prophet's heart would be a loving heart. How could Allah give him his love when his heart was not open to loving? Would people describe you as a loving person? Not what you would like to be described as, but would people actually do so based on how we carry and conduct ourselves? The Prophet ﷺ was somebody, when described, it's mentioned, "Man ra'ahu badihatan habahu." The one who suddenly encountered him would be like overcome with awe, like wow, like impressed. وَمَنْ خَالَطَهُ مَعْرِفَةً أَحَبَّهُ. But the one who would get to know him and become really close to him could not help but fall in love with him. Does that describe us? The Prophet would make dua, Allahumma inni as'aluka hubbak. Oh Allah, I ask for your love. Wa hubba man yuhibbuk. And I ask for the love of those people who also love you. Oh Allah, I'm not just asking that I love you and you love me, but also I want the love of those people who also love you. Because passion is contagious. How many of you would agree with this? Some of the best teachers we had growing up were those teachers who were passionate. How many of you would say so? That's true. None of us, if I'm honest, would really appreciate that teacher who came in and at some level you felt they didn't care about you. They were just there to earn a paycheck. Okay, guys, open up to page 37. Yeah, and they start writing on the board and you're sitting there going like, oh. And they don't even know anybody's name. They're like, hey, you, can you read, please? You're like, who, me? Like, you don't know my name. And we're not inspired. We're not moved by such teachers. We don't develop a passion for a subject. Passion is contagious. I mean, isn't that why, people get inspired by David Goggins? Goggins doesn't speak facts. He doesn't sit there and give you the research. He just tells you, stay hard, and that's it. Right? That's all he says. And people are moved because they're like seeing this guy run miles after miles, look you in, like swear at you. And you're like, yo, passion. And you feel moved. This is what the human being. Jonathan Haidt talks about this. Haidt talks about it in The Righteous Mind. Why good people are divided over religion and politics. He talks about how people are moved to action primarily through their emotions. Emotions, from the word motion, meant to move you to action. That's the elephant he gave the analogy of. It's an elephant. And logic is the rider. And when the elephant gets moving towards something, the rider can really can't really hold it back. That's how some of us are. We know that we shouldn't do something. I shouldn't eat that. I really shouldn't, right? Isn't that what you say before we make that diet mistake? I really shouldn't. But we do because the elephant's moving towards it. Or I know there's red flags, but the elephant's moving towards it. We are people of passion. What happens when our passions are controlled and they're directed towards those deeper truths of life? People who are passionate about loving humanity. People who are passionate about love for God. People who are passionate about helping others. People who are passionate about making the world a better place. People who are passionate about beauty. People who are passionate about being there for others during their difficult times. These are virtues. And we don't lust after virtues. We have a deep appreciation and love for virtues. But then the question becomes, how do you develop virtues? See, Shakespeare, in his plays, at least he highlights these character flaws, the vices, right? So he talks about the greed for power, what that will do to you, and how it will lead you to kill people in order to get to that power. Greed, forbidden love. Today, we live in a society that exploits these things, that tries to sell you based on your greed. And that's why our society is a deeply oppressive society in this regard. It doesn't acknowledge vices, and not only that, it exploits the vices. And so it's very hard for children. How many of you have a young child, relative, maybe a sibling or a relative, or even a family friend, that wants to be an influencer? Anybody? A little kid who says, I want to be famous. I want to be an influencer. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? Do they really understand what it means? No. The human nafs seeks to be admired. It comes with a cost, though. What are you willing to do to be recognized? What are people willing to do nowadays to meet the demand of their nafs to get recognition? To get what they feel is the love they want. To get what they feel is the love they want. They will change their physical bodies. They will go under the knife. They'll get injections just to be enough, just for people to admire them. They will sell their souls. They will do the most ridiculous things that go viral because of how ridiculous it is. But any fame is good fame. That's what it is now. Any fame is good fame. Even if I'm infamous, but hey, at least people know me. That's feeding to the nafs. That's the society that we live in. How in such a society, how do you go back to becoming a person of virtue and love? Spiritual growth, what does spirituality call you towards? Virtue. At its core, spirituality is about developing virtue. It's about shunning vices, which means you have to know what virtues are and what vices are. And then you have to make an active effort to develop the former and stay away from the latter. And when you do that, subhanAllah, one of the virtues is to be a person of love. Oh Allah, grant me your love, and grant me the love of the people who love you. Let me be around people who love you so that I can sustain and maintain my love. Let me be around people. That's why the Prophet told us, you will be on the religion of the people around you, of your friend. Like, you will do what they do. You will be passionate for what they're passionate for. And this was a wisdom that is not restricted to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, his was a beautiful saying in Arabic. Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi falyanzur ahadukum man yukhalil. But we have what? Birds of the same feather flock together. Like, what is that? Like, we talk about birds, right? The same idea. That's why we're taught to come together as a community. And it ought to be a community of love. A community where you look at someone and you see beauty. You see the good in them. You want good for them. Because love is about giving, not taking. It's what can I give? And I look around the room and I say, what can I give? What can I offer here? How can I be there for them? You know, one of my friends, in one of his poems, he writes, he says, since love grows within you, so beauty grows. For love is the beauty of the soul. He says, when you see the world through the purity of love, it glances back with a smile. When you see the world through purity of love, then the world glances back with a smile. Meaning what? When you go around looking for goodness and beauty, that is what you will notice. And when you go in looking for flaws, that is what you'll notice. The human being has the ability to use selective attention, to focus on something and ignore others. What is it that we focus on a daily basis? Have we refined our souls to the point that when we do look at people, we look at the beauty and the good within them? To do that, you have to look past the form. Because the first thing you see is the form. But can you see past that? And so we ought to make dua. Oh Allah, I ask you for your love and the love of those who love you and the love of deeds that will bring me your love. Because the question becomes, we want to become people who love. and ultimately who love Allah. How do we earn Allah's love? Becomes a question. How do we become people who possess the traits and the qualities that Allah loves us? I'll speak about that next week, inshallah. But I want to finish tonight with a little reflection on the word love in Arabic, so that we can understand that there's a lot of work that goes into loving and to being a person of love. The word in Arabic for love, and there are many words to describe the like layers of love. What are words that we might have for love? We got like love and like, right? Like love and like. In Arabic, you have wood, right? You have mawadda, you have ishq, you have many different words. I'm going to focus on one that's probably the most famous, mahabba. Mahabba comes from the same roots as another word, which is habba. Habba means a seed. Mahabba means love. And so this is really the journey of love, because love begins unseen. Just like you take a seed and you place it in the ground and no one sees it, it's just there deep down. Love begins in the heart, unseen. No one sees what you love. But then what do you have to do in order for that seed to become apparent? You have to nurture it and water it. What do you have to do in order for the fruits of that love and for that love to grow? You have to nurture it. In our children's hearts, for example, one of our goals is to develop children who love. That's one of my goals with my children, is to develop them as people who love goodness and who love beauty, who love virtue, who love service. Now, to do that, you have to love them and show them the beauty of these actions. Tell them about the virtues of them. Nurture that love. Give them a reason to love it. That's why, and today's just like a day of rants, I realized, But subhanAllah, I appreciate the therapy, guys. I appreciate it. You know what I mean? That's why, how do you teach a child to read? You know how many of you really hated book reports? I loved to read growing up. I hated book reports. I'm like, just let me read the book. No, but describe the character development. Dude, let me just read the book. I don't want to do a whole report. That's not how you teach a child to love reading. One of my goals is to get my children to love reading. Just love it. Just choose to sit down and read. Because if someone develops that love, they will be a lifelong learner. A lifelong learner. They will constantly want to read and further, because they'll develop an appreciation for intellectual satisfaction, moral, spiritual satisfaction. And so, how do you do that? How do you nurture that love in their hearts? You read with them. You read in front of them. And you give them space to choose what they want to read. You talk to them about what they read. You don't make it obligatory. That's one of the issues. When you start to obligate someone to do something, they feel a loss of autonomy. And they then become resentful. And so, subhanAllah, look at how many people love to read today. I really believe that our education system has something to do with that. That we don't like to read. It's not common to see people who say, I really love reading. Like, I went to the library yesterday. It's like, oh, it's not as common. We don't just assume that about people. So, it has to be nurtured. And then, as you nurture it, that love becomes manifest. Just as you nurture a seed, it slowly starts to manifest. The love of God, how does that manifest? Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ, say, O Prophet, إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ. Say, O Prophet, that if you truly love Allah, then follow me, meaning follow the Prophet Muhammad. And if you do that, Allah will love you. If you love Allah, follow the Prophet. Meaning, your following the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ will be the manifestation of your love for Allah in your heart. That is the standard Allah said in the Quran. He didn't even say, obey me. He said, follow me. When do you follow? You follow with love. It's almost like, come with me. And you only walk with someone that you love. Otherwise, you're just like, yeah, I'm not coming. I'm good. You go ahead. But when we love, we follow. And finally, you have benefiting other people. As a seed grows enough, it starts to benefit people. People are able to eat fruits. People are able to use the branches, the leaves, the whole thing. Similarly, as a person of love becomes a source of benefit to people. Why? Because when you love people, you're ready to be there for them. You're ready to sacrifice from your own side for the sake of others. And it benefits people. And even more so, as you continue to water and grow that tree, the roots get deeper and deeper. And so then the tree becomes unshakable. Similarly, the love for Allah, when nurtured, it becomes unshakable. And then you get what you see with the people of Gaza. People whose faith is unshakable. No matter what happens, that iman is so firmly rooted that no wind blows it over. And we find that in the example of the Prophet ﷺ's companion, Bilal radiallahu an. How he's lying on the scorching sand of Mecca. And what's getting him through the difficulty? Love. Ahad, the one Allah. Right? Because love will get you through those difficulties. You'll be able to bear the pain. When you love something, even the pain is somewhat enjoyable at a certain level. You don't mind. We don't mind cooking for those that we love. As a parent, you don't mind going out even though you're exhausted when you get home and your kid's like, hey, can you buy some candy from the dollar store? And you're tired, you just want to lie down. But there's a love that drives you to go and get it and come back. And when you see their face, it makes it all worth it. It makes it all worth it. That's how the believer stands up for prayer and fasts in the month of Ramadan in the hopes that one day we'll stand in front of Allah and He'll be proud of us for our efforts and it'll all be worth it. That's the goal of the believer. And that's what gets them through those moments. That's why love is one of the most important fruits of faith. Because from it is root so many other virtues grow. And it has the power to transform your lived experience of life. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to really understand the importance of love in our lives. Grant us the ability to develop the capacity and the courage and the strength to continue to love those around us. May He grant us His love and the love of those that love Him and the love of those deeds that will bring us closer to His love. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Jazakumullahu khairan to all of you for coming out. Hopefully there weren't too many rants today, guys. I apologize. But hopefully you understood what I was trying to get at. And hopefully we're able to implement this in our lives, inshallah. Next week we'll speak more about what does it take to be someone that's beloved to God, inshallah. We've been speaking about how we can love. Now we want to know what it takes to become beloved in the sight of God, inshallah. All right, we'll see you then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.